I want to start by saying that art is entirely subjective. What one considers great art, another might consider absolute trash. This is not unknown to us. But what happens when a known art form is used as a platform for deviation from the norm? What happens when art isn't just subjective in content, but in definition? This is where I want to begin when talking about Rupi Kaur. Rupi Kaur is a Canadian poet who began performing her poetry as spoken word in 2009. Later, in 2014, she would become known as the author of the infamous book of poetry, Milk and Honey, used by many on Instagram as a way of sharing quick blurbs from the book as superficial takes on the human condition. At this time, Rupi Kaur was both a social media viral phenomenon while simultaneously receiving mass criticism for her work, with the claim that it was surface-level, insignificant blather. I find it particularly of note that she began her poetry career as a spoken word poet, because the distinction between spoken word and written poetry is already a point of contention amongst many. Spoken word is a form of poetry often sidelined under the claim of it being too on the nose, with too much use of what is referred to as slam voice, and too heavily imbued with lukewarm takes. On the other side of the coin, you have the slam poetry advocates, claiming the use of spoken word as a deeper, more intimate form of expression, utilizing auditory techniques to stimulate the mind and get at something deeper than the written language could muster. Either way, we have a long history of one form claiming superiority to the other. It's interesting to see her progression from spoken word into the realm of written poetry, because her written poems often read the same as they might when read aloud. The intonation is right there in the text, and rather than utilizing certain written attempts at variation, Kaur makes a point of keeping the language right in front of us, easy to digest, easy to almost hear. Additionally, Kaur's rise to fame led her to many interviews wherein she literally reads her poems aloud, and you can hear the way they are almost meant to be spoken through her words. I believe that Kaur is a slam poet at heart, merely working to capture the spoken word in a new, more profitable format. The question then becomes, is it really poetry? I'm almost inclined to claim them as posts rather than poems. They're short takes on human experiences, tackling womanhood, abuse, trauma, and other extremely topical ideas. Fans of Kaur's work in particular touch on the raw and honest nature of these excerpts. But are they really poetry? They are art. I won't deny the artistry of anyone attempting to make statements in a world desperately seeking artistry. Milk and Honey is a work of art because it has to be. But is it poetry? Poetry is defined by Britannica as literature that evokes a concentrated, imaginative awareness of experience or a specific emotional response through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. The piece I wish to emphasize here is meaning, sound, and rhythm. When you look at a Rupi Kaur poem, it is not initially obvious as to what sound and rhythm is being evoked. The rhythm of each poem reads as rather stagnant and non-existent. It takes a reading aloud to really place any emphasis on these key elements. And this is why I believe Rupi Kaur's work is spoken word. It's meant to be read, to be heard, to be ingested orally. So why isn't it? This brings me to my next point, the commercialization of poetry in the modern age. Instagram, Twitter, and other social media like them have a way of taking complex ideas and boiling them down to their simplest forms. What could be a fascinating and relevant debate on racial insensitivity becomes a mere section of watered-down block text making one bold statement into mere fodder for internet comment discourse. This isn't new information. We've known for a long time that the internet isn't the best place for social change. It's full of blanket statements and a severe lack of greater emotional context. So when Rupi Kaur made a post depicting the raw reality of the menstrual cycle, it was, again, taken as fodder for internet discourse. Because of this post, her fame skyrocketed, and this led her to utilize her newfound platform to commodify and promote her work, leading many who supported her to buy into her book of poetry. Afterwards, her fame continued, as hundreds of Instagram posts and tweets became her new voice. Her poems were just short enough and just poignant enough to make waves in the new social media stratosphere. With pieces like this one, she was able to share her work in a new way, using social media to propel her forward. Her validity as a poet, stating her work to be insta-poetry and nothing more. People even have gone as far as to say that her work isn't poetry at all, and is in fact a bastardization of the art form. What I find so interesting about this is that Rupi Kaur single-handedly revitalized poetry for a younger generation. Statistically, when Milk and Honey came out, poetry was a dying art form. Now, this is a bit of an exaggeration, given that theater is also considered a dying art form, yet Broadway is as thriving as ever. That said, many articles were coming out in this era claiming poetry to be dead, as younger generations of people were less and less inclined to delve into classical poetry, and we were seeing less and less people coming out with books of poetry to read. Milk and Honey, it could be said, revitalized poetry with its quippy, short, digestible poems. In a way, it was a genius move to create a book of poetry so bite-sized and retainable that it was social media bound from its conception. This takes me to a new point. Art is designed to evolve. More specifically, it is meant to adapt to new mediums as such mediums are created. So when social media becomes the medium most people are now digesting content, why not create a set of poetry designed to neatly fit within the parameters social media sets? Is it not smart to utilize the platforms you're given? Is it not viable to create art that is going to reach the most people? Or art that is designed to reach a target audience? I don't believe making art this way is inherently bad or stupid or lacking in credibility. I think it is different than other art, and it is adapting for a world that is more and more contingent on social media providing them with the content that is digestible and quality. To take it even further, Rupi Kaur was the spearhead for an entire movement of like-minded creators that took her style of work and made their own quippy content to match. Rupi Kaur is no longer just a social media poet, she's a trendsetter. And while some might see this trend as lacking in substance, it actually delves really well into a lot of social issues. The art is saying something. It might be short, it might seem frivolous to the naked eye, but it is making statements that relate strongly to young girls. Young girls have long been the butt of the joke to modern society. Whether it be the Twilight series or the ukulele, things that young girls flock to in large numbers are often seen as lesser forms of art and expression. And I believe the same is true of Kaur's work. Because it is and has been popularized by a younger feminine audience, it is discredited as weak writing. But I think Kaur actually creates content that is designed to reach the exact audience she's getting. It speaks to things that many young girls experience, and provides a sense of comfort and relatability to them. I believe that is valuable. I believe Rupi Kaur's rise to fame is more than just an Instagram fluke. I believe her work is filling a necessary void and creating pieces that move young audiences to share, like, and repost. It may not have the deep metaphorical language imbued into a lot of poetic work, but it still matters. Art matters regardless of the medium it takes on. Kaur herself has commented on the seemingly simplistic nature of her work, stating that she agonized over poetry analysis in school and wanted to create work that was more accessible. To me, this gets at the core of why Rupi Kaur is so important to talk about. Her work is not designed to be intense. It's designed to be relatable. It's designed to get at ideas and senses of being that aren't hidden in deep metaphor. It's meant to be seen and understood from the first read. So, is Milk and Honey a book of poetry? Maybe. But is it a work of art that deserves appreciation despite its format? I think so.